Welcome to the FAM Podcast, guys, where we dive deep into the minds and journeys of artists shaping our cultural landscape today. Today, we're privileged to host Avangelia, a soul singer and introspective songwriter from Brooklyn whose music transcends genre boundaries. With ethereal R&B woven with psychedelic guitar lines, rippling banjo, and lush jazz harmonies, Avangelia creates music that serves as a gateway to soulful and immersive journeys. Her debut album, Angel in the Wild, has been earning praise, including an NPR Tiny Desk Top Shelf Spotlight for her unique approach that blends her diverse influences of R&B, jazz, folk, rock, and blues into what she calls her definition of neo-soul, a combination of everything that gives you a visceral feeling, no matter the roots. Please welcome Avangelia.
That's quite a tongue twister. I gotta look at that bio.
How you doing? Thank you.
Good. How are you?
So good. I always am fascinated by, how people got into music. And when you performed at FAM a few months ago, I think the obvious first thing that stood out to not just me, but everyone in the room was your voice. This angelic voice that could move so seamlessly between chest and head. I read that you started voice lessons or vocal coaching when you were just 11 years old. Is that right? How did that come to be? Were you singing as a kid growing up, and then at some point were your parents we got to get her into something more professional?
Yeah, I think I was just always an artistic kid. I don't think I knew I wanted to do specifically music until honestly, the New York City public school system got me into it. But I was dabbling in dance. I was in dance school. I was doing acting in elementary school, and I just really loved the arts, and I loved music because my dad always played music in the car, and I was a big fan of Aretha Franklin and Erykah Badu and just really great female singers. But I didn't know, honestly, that I was going to pursue singing until I had to audition for middle school. And I was like, you know what? I guess I'm going to do singing. And I started training classically throughout then until I got into
middle
jazz.
school.
And yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, one thing that you said that was interesting, and I think is a common theme that I see among so many of my musical friends, is that they had a parent or an older sibling who got them into music, but not necessarily by way of being a musician themselves, but through playing music for their kids or younger siblings at an early age. You said your dad would always play music in the car growing up. Tell me about your parents as the musical early influence for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, my dad was just a music connoisseur. I just found out that he DJ'd back in the day. I didn't even know that. But yeah, he just always had things playing. I always had something in my ear. And then on my mom's side, she played banjo growing up, and she had this kind of deep folk history in her family that she kind of tried to hide from me because I was, a mixed kid growing up in Brooklyn, and she didn't think I would be too into that. But I would always beg her to just play it for me and sing me these old folk songs. So I think I just had a lot of different influences in my ear. So when it came time for me to create, I was already there was things bubbling and that kind of mixture of soul and folk.
Yeah. You also talked about the New York public school system almost inspiring a big part of your creative journey. Can you talk a little bit about what is it exactly about the New York school system that got you into the creative arts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with the structure of our specialized schools in New York City, which is another conversation. But I found out about the middle school I went to, Mark Twain, which is a magnet school. And I was good at school. I was good at academics, but I definitely wanted something creative. And so when I auditioned there and got in, I automatically was going through a track where I had vocal class every day, choir every day, singing lessons every day. And I kind of got into this regimen, and I was like, I kind of like this practice.
Wow. As early as middle school?
Yeah. Yeah. And then it was the same thing going into high school, where I auditioned for LaGuardia High School. I got in, and it was even more intensive. So I had multiple choirs, I had multiple voice teachers, and then different genres were happening. So I started in classical, singing in German art songs, and then I was doing jazz band, and then I was doing this songwriting class that I got into. And that's where I kind of really was like, oh, I think this is what I want to do. It's not just a practice, and just find my own voice through that.
That's so cool. What are these schools printing superstars in New York City? You know, it's funny because like in Sweden is interesting because in school, you know, their school system, they're producing pop music producers and pop songwriters, right? And it's interesting to hear you talk about the influence of, you know, schooling here, essentially getting you into this track of singing, writing, performing, which is really cool. So fast forward back to being 11 years old, taking, you know, auditioning for the middle school singing that you were telling us about, and, you know, getting into that program where you're like, okay, I'm actually doing this now. Like, at what point from then did you, when after that were you like, okay, this is like my passion, this is like what I want to do, I want to actually go from just singing classically to actually writing my own songs? Because I think that's a little bit different. A lot of people get into music by playing other people's music, and at some point you were like, I want to make my own music.
Yeah, so I think it's really funny. I had this really deep country arc in my interests. And so I think my first year of high school, I took a trip to Nashville. And I was just getting into playing guitar at the time, and just like playing cover songs and things I liked. And I went to like a couple songwriting circles. And I just found it really interesting that people kind of told their stories through songwriting like that. And it could be very simple. It didn't have to be in this regimen that I was in of like, you know, you have to learn this piece and you have to go according to the arrangement and make very few embellishments. And I really just wanted to find my voice through that. So right after that trip, I wrote my first song. And I was like, oh, this really feels like me. Like, I didn't really feel like I had a personality within music until that happened.
How old were you?
How old are you when you're in high school? 15?
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that, I just kept writing, and then I was also in the songwriting class and started working with bands and working with collectives where I was like, oh, maybe I can start like arranging things the way I hear them. And I started writing in that way, right? Like I would write for a stage. And I think that's also what comes from my schooling. It's like I would write for a performance. I would write for a delivery. So I would already automatically be playing guitar and like thinking about a bass line and thinking about, okay, this is the part where the drums build up. And I just really found my niche there. That's
cool. I love this like incremental approach, right? From like classically training your voice to, you know, picking up the guitar and learning that instrument, to playing other people's music, to then writing your own music, to writing for not just you on the guitar, but for a group to perform the music. Do you remember the first song you wrote? Do you remember what it was about?
Yeah. My first song is called... No, actually. It was called Stormy Weather. And I wrote it about a dream I had because my mom, both of my parents actually had pretty like deep kind of traumatizing past. And I wrote it about her upbringing and her like wanting to leave home or needing to leave home and kind of escape this place that she was in. And I remember when I played it for people, they were like, what did you write this about? Like, what did you possibly go through that you wrote this?
I'm so curious. How did your mom react?
She cried.
For her. That's beautiful.
She cried, and she was just like, whoa, I didn't even know that I exerted this much emotion and like gave you this much of a story to tell, even through, because she never specifically told me all the things that she went through. But I think, you know, when you grow up close to your parent, especially because I was only living in her house, we just became really, really tight, and you kind of feed off of each other's emotions.
Yeah. I'm so curious, how do you think about writing for, I wouldn't say for, but how do you think about telling other people's stories versus telling your own stories in your songwriting? Because like this first song was actually a song of you telling your mom's story.
Yeah.
And where do you get your inspiration from?
I think personally, I choose to, if I'm not writing about myself, I'm writing about people close to me. I think personally, it's hard for me to write about external sources where I'm not like very physically in someone's vicinity and really understanding. Because I think for me, a lot of art needs to be informed. And for me to feel good about telling a story, like I need to be very informed and like historically accurate and emotionally accurate. Otherwise, it might not be my story to tell. But even when I write introspectively, I try to do a lot of different metaphors and things that, someone who might not even be thinking about the situation can relate to it. So I try to balance it, but it is, I think, probably 70% introspective for me.
So, okay, walk us through. So you start this songwriting circle. You evolve from just being a vocalist to a songwriter to writing for, bigger groups, writing for bands. And then in high school, where did you go from there?
I then started applying to colleges. We're still in the school system. And then I got into NYU's Clive Davis Institute for recording music. And I thought that I was going to Berkeley because I had a full scholarship there. And then I got into this program, which I was sure I wasn't getting into because they said it was so exclusive and all these things. Yeah. And then when I got there, I got really into audio engineering. And that it
really filling the circle.
Yeah. And it was a holistic program. So I had to do performance and songwriting and production, but the newest thing was audio engineering, and it was so intimidating. But because I was so obsessed with sound already through my productions, I've got so into it where I was nitpicking the Soulquarian era and all the Erykah Badu records, all the D'Angelo records. My teacher at the time was Bob Power, who engineered those records. So I was just picking his brain, picking everyone who knew about that time period and trying to find okay, for my recordings, how do I get the rim to sound like that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that is the biggest takeaway for me out of there. And then I recorded my whole album in my senior year of that program, which was 2024.
What is it like being in the room with someone who's been in the room with some of the best musicians, the best records that have ever been made, some of your favorite artists?
It's surreal. It's intimidating, but he was literally the nicest person. And he immediately was taken by my music. We had these class projects, and I took mine very, very seriously. And I found my co-producer very fast, Corey, and we were both into the same things. And when he kind of saw the neo soul direction, he kind of took us under his wing, which was really awesome. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But I mean, at the end of the day, you realize that these people are just human. And he would tell us these stories about how he would be in the room with these people and make so many mistakes and just play it off. And he's just at the end of the day, you're always going to be learning. He was he's in his 70s. He's I'm still learning. So I think just taking into account how human and prone we are and all kind of similar in our learning experiences.
Yeah. Talking about, your brand of neo soul, I'm curious, you talked about your mom, being a musician herself, playing music, and then your dad's influences in the music that he DJ'd for you as a child. How did growing up, with not just your parents, but with this, I would say, very diverse ethnic background too, Black, white, Puerto Rican, how did this diversity influence your sound? Because clearly your sound is a fusion of so many influences as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was always searching for the fusion. I was try not to be cliche, but I loved folk and country growing up, but it was kind of taboo to be Brooklyn Black girl to these things. And then I was so into soul, and I was also finding my voice. My voice was ever changing because I was training in classical and jazz, but also into these poppier areas. So I think my voice grew with that, but it ended up me being able to create a genre that I hadn't heard, but I wanted to hear growing up. And someone asked me this question, would you, as a kid, would you like the music that you're making now? And I think that is true. I made this banjo R&B song. I've never heard that growing up, and I think it would have been something that little me would have looked up to.
Yeah, you got to make music ultimately for yourself first. That's why we make music.
Yeah.
As a first step. And I feel so often where people err is when they're trying to make music to fit an audience or make music that they think someone else would like without really feeling it themselves. And ultimately, if we're not feeling it, most of the time other people aren't feeling it.
Right.
So we got to make music that we feel in order for other people to actually feel, in order for it to resonate. And you see this not just with music, but with all sorts of art forms, even social media to some extent, right? Like I think a lot of artists like us will treat social media as just marketing, and we're artists and we're not marketers, and so we're not really feeling that we have to do all that, or we're hating that we have to do this. It's like a necessary evil. But the ones who seem to be most successful at it are the ones who have found a way to align what they're putting out there on social media with their art, making it something where the visual art that they're promoting online is something that they view as an art project, not as a marketing project.
Yeah. I think, like you said, I mean, that's why it took me so long to put out music in the first place, because I think there was so many things that I scrapped. I was like, it feels like me-ish, but it's not like fully what I want to say yet. And also like growing up and developing, I'm still a teenager, and like figuring out when is the right time to showcase myself on the outside. And there's, like you said, this push to, market your own music and market kind of yourself as the brand. But I chose when I was ready, and I'm really grateful to myself that I did choose that time, because I don't think I would have been ready to say this is who I am and then be able to market it further if I didn't do that.
I think one thing that most people don't really spend a lot of time thinking about on the art piece of any piece of art is the presentation, right? And it's like, it's one thing to write songs and put it out, but it's another thing to create a collection that has a cohesive narrative, that has a unique identity, that's truly you, right? And I think oftentimes, if just speaking from my own experience, as someone who grew up with a lot of genres, growing up in the internet age where we have access to every single song out there, writing music that's like straight ahead rock, or writing music that's straight ahead dance music, or writing music that's straight ahead, hip hop. Like, it's not like you want to put out everything that you make. Sometimes you just got to make it because it's like an itch you have to scratch. The art that most people don't really talk about is in collecting this body of work that is a cohesive representation of what is specifically unique about your sound. And that's something I really appreciate about your debut record, because it definitely sounds so uniquely you. And what I really loved about your performance at FAM was that, this is, a cohesive concept here.
Yeah.
How do you balance, though, between wanting to put out new music and then sometimes having to hold back and say, wait, does this fit within like my sound? And then also, how do you evolve your sound? Because I think some of our favorite musicians and artists are always evolving, right? They didn't just find one sound and repeat that sound. They're constantly evolving. At what point are you like, okay, this is something that I want to put out, or this collection is something I want to put out as my statement?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I've always just naturally had a really good instinct on projects, because I grew up with albums. Like, I wanted to listen to an album through. So for that first album, I think it was a collection of like my favorite songs of my first songs. And some of it was just a timepiece, right? You're in a period of your life where things naturally sound similar because you're going through the same things, or you're just in a time. But I definitely was intentional about like, okay, how is this going to tell a story? And a lot of that record is about like kind of complicated love. And I've decided that record is a lot about the in-between and like contrast. So a lot of it is like acceptance of love, and a lot of it is about letting go, and the one banjo song is about anxiety, but it's a lot about my growth. And it kind of ties into the wild part of things and the kind of foresty concept that I had about it. But I think stuff I'm working on now, I'm holding on to things because the story's not fully told. I think I can't really tell a full story in a song, I think, which is why I love projects so much. And it also depends on the people you work with, right? Like, I'm starting to work with some new people who I really admire, and I'm trying to let that sound develop before I tell people about it, because I feel like I'm one of those superstitious people who, like, if you let something out too early, it just ruins the magic of it.
Yeah. That's such a contrast in the world we live in now, which is all about immediate gratification,
Right.
putting out singles, putting out works in progress even before they're even out, posting your little snippets on TikTok before you even like, sit down to record.
Yeah, no, literally. And I'm very insecure about that too, because I'm very well aware that TikTok is an important part of things these days. And I feel like I still move in a very old school fashion when it comes to releasing things and sharing things. But I try to stay grounded in the belief that things that last long don't need to be rushed.
Yeah. So speaking of, writing long-lasting legacy pieces, what's your next? What do you have coming up next?
Well, I'm actually working on a few video pieces that represent the music, still tying to the last album, but kind of telling more visual representation of it. I just won my last music video just won in a New York Film Festival, which is really
congrats.
fun. Thank you. So I'm really trying to sink into what the visual representation of these things looks like. But I'm also working on new music and, like I said, trying to figure out what story I'm telling there, because I think this last year has been very, very dramatic for me. So yeah, I'm working on I'm working on collaborating more, because I feel by myself or with two people in a studio, and I'm trying to push myself to work with other artists a little more and see what I can do there.
Yeah, well, it's inspiring to see you following your inspiration. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, cheers.